So the last thing that we are going to do today is assembling our waistband. You'll have two pieces, one that's been interfaced and one that has not. And we're going to join these together along the long edge. This is going to be the top of our waistband. So if you have a directional print, you want to make sure that you have it going the correct direction. Just going to take this to our machine with our 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew. Alright, so we've sewn it together. Now we're going to do a little bit of finishing to the seam. We're going to take our pinking shears and trim down the seam so we don't have quite so much bulk at the top of our waistband. Alright, so we want to press the waistband seam of our skirt. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take it flat and I'm going to press it. Right? And the way I'm pressing it is so that the seam allowance is pressed toward the non-interfaced side, and that's going to be the inside of our waistband. Alright, so once you've got that good and pressed, we're going to pop right back over to the sewing machine. So, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to understitch. So we pressed our seam allowance towards the non-interface side, and we're going to sew maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch right on this side, onto the non-interface side, and that's going to hold this facing to the inside so it doesn't peek over the top of our waistband. Doesn't have to be perfect. We just want it nice and close. So here is our stitching right there. And we got one last press to do. Alright, so next we are going to press our waistband like a hot dog bun. Like so. Alright? So I like to have the right side on top, so it's the side that we didn't understitch, so I can press it and make sure that this side, the side here, is not poking out. So I like to press from this direction. So now we have this nice crisp edge from the other side. So the first thing you want to do is do 2 rows of gathering stitches on your skirt. As you can see, I've applied my 2 rows of gathering stitches. Alright, I put one at the seam allowance, one about an 1/8 of an inch into the seam allowance. On my machine it works really well to sew the first one at the seam allowance, and then just to run that line of stitching right on the other side of the edge of my presser foot, and that gives me about an 1/8 of an inch. Alright, so let me show you how you want to set that up on your machine. So here's my sewing machine. We can see that it's at a width of 0 and a stitch length of 2.5. So we want to make that stitch length as long as possible. So we're going to make it all the way up to 5, which is the maximum setting, and that's the stitch length that you want to use for your gathering stitches. You're also going to want to have a tail on your bobbin thread. So I'm going to show you how to do that if you don't have one. So you want to take your you're going to manually make 1 stitch, pull it all the way up, and then you're going to take the tail from your spool and also the thread that's coming out of your machine from the spool and pull up, and you'll see a little loop comes up attached. That's your bobbin thread right in there, and then you can just pull that little tail out. Then you'll have your bobbin tail. Alright, the next thing you want to do is you want to take your skirt and you want to mark at the halfway point and at the quarter. So 1/4 and 3/4 of the way around. And I just marked those with pins. And we're going to use these to help evenly distribute the gathers around the waistband. We're going to do the same thing with the waistband before we attach the skirt. So you're going to want to take your skirt and find one of the ends, and you want to separate the front tails that came off of the spool of thread and the bottom tails which came off of the bobbin, and you're just going to pull on those bottom tails. You can see we're going to start to make gathers, and you're just going to push those gathers down and make some more gathers and push those down and make some more. It might take you a while because it's going to be a pretty big skirt. But keep going, work from both ends. That seems to work the best for me. We're going to be gathering the skirt all the way down so that the whole width of the skirt fits on our waistband. Now when you're doing this, you're going to match up your pins at the quarters and the half to those on the waistband so that we have the gathers evenly distributed. And you also want to keep about 3/4 of an inch of the section at each end flat so that we have enough seam allowance to attach our button placket. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and attach it to my waistband, and I will be back so we can sew our skirt to our waist. Alright, look, we have gathering success. So gathered our skirt to our waistband, and make sure you want to be attaching it to the interface side of the waistband, right sides together, and we've distributed our gathers evenly by matching at the halfway point and the quarters around our skirts, and then we just fiddled with those little gathers until they're nice and even where we don't have any bunchy spots or any flat spots. So it looks pretty even. Now we're gonna sew it on, and we're gonna use our 1/2 inch seam allowance to sew on our skirt. Alright, so now that we're done, it's a good time to take a second to check your seam from the right side to make sure nothing funky has happened. Got a lot of fabric going on, sometimes funky things happen. Awesome sauce, we are good. Looking good, looking good. Now, we're going to go over to the ironing board to finish off our waistband. What we're doing here, we have our inside of our waistband, and we're tucking that seam allowance under, and we want to press it down. Now your seam allowance doesn't have to be exactly exact, so it might be best if it's just a little bit on the big side so it comes just shy of where you stitched, because we're going to be slip stitching this down. Alright, so press it, and then you can go ahead and pin that down in place when you are done pressing it. And then we're just going to slip stitch this edge to our skirt so that our yicky looking waist seam is all hidden pretty under the facing. Alright, so I'm going to do that, and I will be back.